It's the third week of work on the roof, and after our preparations on the tops of the walls, our focus is now on pouring the concrete ring beam and preparing for the new wooden beams. However, the weather forecast is even more mixed than it was before, and it looks pretty certain that there's going to be quite a lot of rain passing through. So we'll be watching the skies closely, and I'll be trying to push things along as fast as possible, which is sometimes a bit harder than it could be. So when I arrived to open up on Monday morning, I had a list of things that I wanted to get done. And with the bright morning, I was reasonably confident that rain would not be a problem, at least during the day. When the team arrived, they got their things organised and then got set up. With Haggy back on the church wall, Sam getting the winch set up before helping me with my first to-do list item involving some beam measures and lines. And then Sam was lifting in the final metal frames for the ring beam. Next on my list was some checks on the cornice on the front wall and the condition of its top layer, for which I first needed to clear the gutter. Haggy and Miguel had now finished the stone clearing on the end wall and were putting the metal frame in place. And while I was busy lifting in some mortar, they also got the metal frame in above the brick wall and in its ceramic channel. They then needed to connect the most recent metal frames to the ones already in place. And with the metal for the ring beam in place, they now started to build up the front edge, Haggy using stones, and Miguel using a combination of tiles and bricks that needed delivering to him. Fodo and Sam briefly had time for some rubble shifting before their mid-morning break. Last week I mentioned that we had had a slight change of plan on our approach on this wall and that I would tell you about it this week. So while the guys are on their mid-morning break, I thought I'd tell you a bit more about it. The original plan for this wall was for the ring beam to be at the same level as the wooden beams that come across and rest here. But when we removed this edge of stones, we found that we might not actually have enough space here for the beams to rest on, and that we're better off creating more space for the beams to rest on by putting the ring beam below the wooden beams. So that meant taking out an extra layer, if you like, of stones off the edge. And then we will create the ring beam across the whole space so that we can then place the wooden beams on top with at least 20 to 22 centimeters of space over this edge. So that's the approach we're now taking. And after the break, the team were back on this wall and in need of more mortar. With more mortar needed, more water was also needed. And while I waited for the deposit to fill, My next checklist item involved the old beams, where I wanted to take some photos to help an AI tool confirm what type of wood it was, and where I wanted to cover the beams from the likely rain this week. Back upstairs, the team were making good progress with the inner edges for the ring beam on the far wall. And I was back on the front gutter, removing it to check the old cornice below. While down below, I briefly followed a big pack of swifts, which were still around when I was back upstairs. My next task was not on the to-do list, but the cable on the winch now needed untangling. And by the time it was fixed, the team had moved on to preparations at the back of the house, where they would be working more from now on. And while they organised the scaffolding for a bigger winch, I worked on the last item on my list for the day, which was to finish the rubble smoothing started earlier. Overnight, a storm had rolled in with plenty of rain, and I was pleased I had covered the old beams the day before, although based upon the water on top of them, I was fearing the worst about the floors and wall tops in the house. Well, that doesn't look too bad. A fair amount of rain did fall on the floor, but it's probably done us a bit of a favour more than anything else in that it's dampened all the dust, which should stop it blowing up into the air, at least for today. You may have noticed that I'm not wearing my usual work clothes at this stage, and that's because after opening up and seeing the start of the work, I need to head down the hill for an hour or so, for which I need to look a little bit cleaner and tidier. And I'm actually going to be going to the same place that Haggy and I went to last week for the pickup and the delivery into that room there. And the work the team would be starting on once they were on site was the pouring of the ring beam, which would involve mixing concrete at the back of the house and lifting it up with a bigger winch. And for making the concrete, they needed a good supply of water to be pumped from the deposits by the entrance. And having seen the team get set up, I headed down the hill. I'm now 10 minutes down the hill on the other side of the nearest town, and I'm at a site that I drive past every day on my way to the house. And it's the site for an insulation company called Kingspan. And one day I dropped in here and told them about the house and that I would like to use local products wherever possible. And they very kindly agreed to help. And they told me about one of their new products, which would be a good fit for many different parts of the house, including on the roof. Anyway, I'm here today to have a look at the factory to see how the insulation that I picked up last week was made. After signing in and receiving my visitor's bib, I joined up with Marta from the local team who would be showing me around. First, walking the length of the factory on the outside to use the entrance at the start of the production process. I wasn't able to record inside the factory, so this is recorded later in the day, when I'm still not able to say too much about what I saw. But it was a lot of fun to see the inside, and it was pretty much as I thought it would be. There was a very long production line with some big machines along it, and actually fewer people involved than I thought there would be. And the whole environment was immaculately tidy, with the ingredients for the insulation entering at one end, and then after a transformation process in the middle, these neatly packaged panels of insulation would come out the other end. And when we were walking through, they were running a batch of, I think, 24 millimeters high insulation by 3 meters long. As you can see, I was very impressed when we came out of the factory. And we then walked through an even bigger distribution centre, where all the different products were briefly stored before being picked up by trucks much bigger than the one Haggy and I had used. After the tour and walkabout, it was time to hand back my bib and head back to the house to see how the ring beam work was progressing. Which, after various discussions, we had decided to do the concrete work by hand on site rather than have the concrete brought in by truck and then pumped or lifted in by a separate vehicle. This would make various steps in the work much slower, but the narrower ring beam channels still needed to be filled in by hand, and the approach would actually be cheaper and more flexible for us, as long as it was done efficiently. This is a quick explanation clip 24 hours after the event, when I came back from the factory visit and the team were working on this part of the ring beam. As usual, they were doing a very good job and it's looking very good now. But when I arrived, I wasn't sure that the process that they were following was that efficient. So I ended up getting much more involved and providing an extra pair of hands in certain parts of the work. And therefore I wasn't able to film very well the work that was going on. So if the clips that are coming up look a bit haphazard, that's the reason why. This is my latest position in the chain, and I'm trying to get things to move a little bit faster. Just about got our process a little slicker, and this one is moving along much faster. My latest station, and we are working our way along this wall here. After some fairly full-on hours in the middle of the delivery chain, I was eventually able to take a bit of a break for a quick snack and a chat with the team below. Before heading back up to help with the delivery process and try to persuade the team to stay on an extra hour to finish the last sections. This suggestion wasn't that popular, so the concrete pouring finished for the day, and the team tidied up below, and we got things ready for a final push the next day. There had been some light rain overnight, and although there were some dramatic clouds about at the start of the day, the forecast was for a warmer, sunnier but windier day. First, I needed to top up the water deposits. And while the team got set up to restart the final ring beam work, I had a meeting with the Technico to review the work so far. After which I was able to catch up with the team's work and see their last bit of concrete lifting and pouring. And with the last section smoothed, the concrete ring beam was in place. Perfectly timed for the mid-morning break. After which the team got set up for some more work on the wall tops, with Haggy working on giving all the beam-bearing walls a smoother mortar top above the ring beam and its wall edges. While Miguel worked on building up the central wall to give it a straighter top after the work we had done on it a couple of weeks ago. I then returned to the cornice on the front wall to take off the material just above it, mostly made up of old dusty mortar and broken tile pieces, which, with the increasingly strong wind blowing straight into me, wasn't the cleanest job to be doing. And I was glad to have a break for some lunch out of the wind. Back up above in the wind, Haggy and Miguel continued their work on the wall tops. And just before the end of the day, Haggy finished the last section of wall top smoothing. Well, it's another lovely sunny morning, and yesterday's wind has disappeared for now. But last night, a big storm with a lot of rain passed through the area, and everything's looking pretty damp out here. So I'm a little worried that the mortar that we put on yesterday might have taken a bit of a bashing. So I'm going to check it out now. Well, thankfully things do not look too bad, and the mortar seems to have dried out sufficiently before it started raining. Although the preparation work on the wall tops was now complete, the new wooden beams would not be arriving until the next day, as it had been considered sensible to build in some contingency. So while I would rather have got them in place as soon as possible, we now had a day to fill with work that had been planned for later, and this would be the initial work on the cornices. So once the team had got set up, they started to clear away all of the old mortar and rubble above the cornices. With Haggie's wall having more material on top, I worked ahead of the shovel, loosening some of the bigger pieces. And I was amused to find this micro bottle buried in the mortar. With the cornice tops on both walls now clearer, the mortar supply chain needed reactivating, and while I waited for it to be ready, I had a chance to look at what we think was the original gutter and drain. And then to admire more bird life high up above. And then during the mid-morning break, to watch the resident sparrows, who despite the roof work, seemed determined to nest above one of the old windows. Then it was back to the cornices, where because of a lot of broken tiles on the back wall, we had decided to take out one more layer. While the cornice on the front wall was now ready for rebuilding, and Miguel now needed tiles, bricks and mortar in place and ready to use. Haggie had now finished the cleaning work on the back wall and was adding a new layer with the support of photo. And this would be our focus for the rest of the day. More mortar meant more water was needed. And back above, I was on mortar supplying duty as well as now filling in the space between the ring beam top and the new cornice layers. This meant one more batch of mortar was needed, and while I waited for it, I tried to film the local swallows flying above us. With the last of the mortar applied, I too called it a day and headed out. There had been some rain overnight, but it appeared to have missed the house. I arrived a little earlier than usual for what was due to be a busy day with the new wooden beams. And when the team arrived, they got ready for this work. First of all, setting up some additional scaffold walkways. And then putting in place two of the spare beams from the last phase of work. With those beams in place, I grabbed a quick snack and shortly afterwards the new beams arrived and everybody became very busy lifting up and placing 19 new beams.
Solo hay uno que hay que picar.
Samuel, the driver and crane controller, had done an excellent job, and in a quite short time his job was done and the team could take a well-earned break. I was able to check how things now look from below. And then the team were back up above to adjust the positions of the beams and to check the levels across them. Work that I didn't capture very well on film and from which I took a break after quite a lot of waiting around. Back up above, the team were making some adjustments above the steel beam, some of which I had hoped would be done before. So after the burst of activity during the delivery, the pace of progress slowed right down, which I was finding a bit frustrating for the end of the week. And that is the end of work for this week, during which the main work area has switched to here at the back, first for making and lifting in the concrete for the ring beam, and then lifting in various tiles, bricks and mortar for the final work on the wall tops and the work on the cornice. And then the work today on lifting in the new wooden beams, which are now all roughly in place, although quite a lot of them will need some more adjusting next week, when we're hoping to be able to put the next layers of the new roof in place. But with the weather forecast not looking great, especially for this weekend, this might be wishful thinking and we might need to do some different work indoors away from the rain. So please do tune in again next week to see how we get on.